Wealth whispers, but arrogance screams. When Robert Sterling, a ruthless venture capitalist with $1 billion portfolio, walked into Chicago's most exclusive restaurant, he expected the world to bow. He certainly expected the exhausted waitress refilling his water glass to be nothing more than background noise. But power is a funny thing. It rarely looks like what you expect. When Robert publicly humiliated her over an ancient, battered cell phone resting in her apron pocket, he thought he was just delivering a punchline. He had no idea that the cracked piece of plastic held the key to his entire empire. The Obsidian Room in downtown Chicago was not just a restaurant. It was a sanctuary for the untouchable. The air inside smelled of white truffles, aged oak, and the faint metallic tang of new money trying desperately to smell like old money. Men in bespoke Italian suits and women draped in quiet, logoless cashmere negotiated the fates of thousands of employees over plates of seared Wagyu beef. For Iphigenia Bennett, the Obsidian Room was just Tuesday. Iphigenia moved through the dimly lit dining room with the invisible grace required of high-end service staff. She was 28, her dark hair pulled back into a severe, utilitarian bun, her black uniform perfectly pressed but worn at the cuffs. To the patrons, she was a ghost who materialized only to refill a crystal goblet or clear a porcelain plate. They didn't know her name, and they certainly didn't care to ask. But Iphigenia preferred the anonymity. 2 years ago, she had been a very different person, living a very different life in Silicon Valley. She had been the architect of a revolutionary encryption algorithm, a prodigy whose mind moved faster than the machines she programmed. But the betrayal, the corporate backstabbing, and the sheer, crushing weight of that world had broken something inside her. She had walked away, seeking the simple, mindless rhythm of physical labor. She found solace in carrying trays, memorizing wine lists, and disappearing into the background. She had kept nothing from her old life, except for her founding shares in a company called Nova Dynamics, and an archaic, heavily encrypted piece of hardware that sat heavy in her right apron pocket. Table 4 needs a sommelier, and Table 9 is complaining about the draft, Liam, the floor manager, hissed as he brushed past her in the service corridor. Liam was chronically stressed, a man whose entire self-worth was tied to the Michelin stars hanging in the lobby. And brace yourself, Iphigenia. The Sterling party just arrived. Private Room A, do not mess this up. Iphigenia nodded, her expression neutral. She knew of Robert Sterling. Everyone in the corporate world knew Robert Sterling. He was the CEO of Sterling Capital, a predatory private equity firm known for buying out vulnerable tech startups, gutting them, and selling them for parts. He was loud, brilliant, and notoriously cruel. As Iphigenia approached Private Room A, she could already hear the booming, self-satisfied laughter echoing through the heavy oak doors. She balanced a tray of sparkling water and pushed the door open with her hip. The room was dominated by Robert Sterling. He sat at the head of the long mahogany table, like a king holding court. He was in his early 50s, with silver fox hair, a sharp jawline, and eyes that constantly calculated the worth of everything they fell upon. Surrounding him were 5 of his junior executives, young, hungry men in identical navy suits, hanging on to his every word like desperate disciples. "I'm telling you, Greg," Robert was saying, swirling a glass of Macallan, "the Nova Dynamics deal is the final piece. By tomorrow morning, we swallow them whole. Their board is cornered. The silent majority shareholder hasn't made a peep in 2 years. They're a ghost. We sweep in, we take the encryption tech, and we liquidate the rest." Greg, a sycophantic vice president with too much pomade in his hair, nodded vigorously. "Brilliant, Robert. Absolutely brilliant. They won't even see the hostile takeover coming." Iphigenia's heart gave a slow, rhythmic thump against her ribs. Nova Dynamics, her company, her life's work. So this was the wolf scratching at the door. Her lawyers had warned her about a hostile takeover attempt, but she had ignored their emails, too tired to engage with the world she had fled. She stepped up to the table, her face a mask of polite indifference, and began pouring the sparkling water. "Make sure it's cold, sweetheart," Robert snapped, not looking at her. He waved a hand dismissively in her direction. "And tell the chef we want the caviar service to start immediately. I have a lot to celebrate tonight. I'm about to add $1 billion to my net worth by buying out a coward who doesn't even have the spine to show their face at a board meeting." Iphigenia's hand didn't tremble. She filled his glass to the exact millimeter required by the restaurant standards. "Right away, sir," she murmured softly. She turned to leave, but as she pivoted, the heavy, awkward weight in her apron pocket shifted. The fabric snagged on the sharp corner of the mahogany table. With a loud plastic clatter that sounded like a gunshot in the hushed private room, her phone tumbled out of her pocket and hit the hardwood floor. It wasn't just an old phone, it was a monstrosity. A thick, rubber-encased, early 2000s-era offline satellite device. It had a physical keypad, a scratched monochromatic screen, and an antenna that stuck out like a sore thumb. It was a custom-built secure line, completely unhackable, designed specifically to bypass modern cell towers. The room went dead silent. The executive stopped laughing. Robert Sterling slowly lowered his glass of scotch, his eyes fixed on the ugly, battered piece of plastic resting by his custom-made Italian leather shoes. For a long, agonizing second, nobody moved. Iphigenia immediately crouched down to retrieve the device, her cheeks flushing with a rare spike of adrenaline. She just wanted to grab it and disappear into the kitchen. But Robert was faster. He leaned down and scooped the bulky phone off the floor, using only his thumb and index finger, holding it up as if it were a dead rat he had found in the alley. "Well, well, well," Robert drawled, his voice dripping with theatrical amusement. "What on earth is this?" Iphigenia stood up, holding her silver tray tightly against her chest to hide the tension in her knuckles. "It's my phone, sir. I apologize for the disruption. If I could just have it back." Robert ignored her. He held the brick-like device up to the chandelier light, turning it side to side. Greg and the other executives began to snicker, a low, sycophantic sound that made Iphigenia's stomach turn. "A phone?" Robert asked, feigning shock. "Are you sure? It looks like a prop from a bad 1990s spy movie, or a garage door opener." He tossed it lightly in his hand, feeling the heavy, durable weight of the military-grade casing. "Look at this, boys. This right here is exactly what I was talking about earlier today during our strategy meeting." Robert stood up, clearly intoxicated by the sound of his own voice and the captive audience of his subordinates. He was going to make a speech, and Iphigenia was about to be the punchline. "Look at this waitress," Robert said, gesturing toward Iphigenia with his scotch glass. "She works in the finest restaurant in Chicago. She serves people who move global markets. She is surrounded by wealth, success, and innovation every single night. And yet, what does she carry in her pocket?" He waved the archaic phone in her face. "Stagnation." Iphigenia's jaw tightened. "Sir, please—" No, let me finish," Robert interrupted, raising his voice so it echoed off the velvet-lined walls. "It's a teachable moment, Greg. Write this down. People often ask me why the poor stay poor. They ask why the working class can never seem to climb the ladder. This—" He slammed the phone down onto the polished mahogany table. "Is why. It's a mindset. It's an absolute refusal to adapt to the modern world." The junior executives erupted into loud, genuine laughter now, emboldened by their boss's cruelty. Greg pointed at the scratched screen. "I think my grandfather had one of those on his boat, Robert." "Does it even get a signal? Or do you have to use Morse code?" "It's a symptom of mediocrity," Robert continued, pacing slowly behind his chair. "You see, a person who carries a relic like this is telling the world they have given up. They have no ambition. They don't value efficiency, connectivity, or progress. They are content to serve water to the people who actually matter. This piece of plastic is a monument to failure." Iphigenia stared at him. The initial embarrassment had completely evaporated, replaced by a cold, crystalline calm. She looked at Robert Sterling, really looked at him. She saw the sweat on his brow, the frantic, desperate energy in his eyes that all over-leveraged men carried. He was a bully, compensating for a balance sheet that was likely bleeding out. "It serves its purpose," Iphigenia said quietly. Her voice wasn't shaking. Robert stopped pacing and looked at her, mildly surprised that she had spoken back. Then, a cruel smirk spread across his face. "Its purpose? What purpose is that, sweetheart? Calling a time machine to take you back to 2004. He picked the phone back up and examined the thick rubber casing. "Honestly, it's an eyesore. It offends me just looking at it. I'll tell you what." Robert reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a sleek, platinum money clip. He peeled off a crisp $100 bill and threw it onto the tray Iphigenia was holding. "There," Robert sneered. "Take that $100, throw this piece of garbage in the nearest dumpster, and go buy yourself a cheap smartphone. Consider it a charitable donation from Sterling Capital to the aggressively stubborn." Just then, the door swung open, and Liam, the manager, practically leaped into the room. He had clearly heard the commotion through the door and looked absolutely terrified. "Mr. Sterling, I am so incredibly sorry," Liam gasped, shooting a venomous glare at Iphigenia. "I apologize for whatever disruption my staff has caused. Iphigenia, get out. Go to the kitchen right now. Mr. Sterling, please. Your meal will be comped tonight. I'll bring you a fresh bottle of the Macallan immediately." "Relax, Liam," Robert chuckled, tossing the old phone back onto the table. It slid across the smooth wood and stopped right at the edge. She was just providing a bit of pre-dinner entertainment, a masterclass in why the bottom 99% will always stay exactly where they are. Liam bowed his head. "Of course, sir. Iphigenia, leave. Now." Iphigenia didn't move. She didn't retreat to the kitchen. Instead, she stepped forward, reaching out her hand to take back the heavy black device resting on the table. But before her fingers could brush the thick plastic casing, the phone rang. It wasn't a standard, modern ringtone. It was a sharp, piercing, mechanical alarm. 3 short bursts, followed by a long, high-pitched tone. It was a frequency designed to cut through loud environments, an emergency protocol alert. Beep, 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 beep. The sound was so harsh and unexpected that Greg jumped in his seat, spilling a few drops of wine onto his crisp white cuff. Robert frowned, irritated by the obnoxious noise interrupting his moment of triumph. The scratched monochrome screen flickered to life, illuminating the dim room with a harsh, pale green glow. Bold, blocky black letters scrolled across the tiny display. Caller ID. Secure Line Alpha. H. Abernathy. Iphigenia froze. Harrison Abernathy, the lead legal counsel for Nova Dynamics. Harrison only ever used the secure line if the board was convening for an emergency vote. A vote regarding a hostile takeover. "Well," Robert barked, waving his hand at the ringing brick. "Answer your toy, sweetheart. Tell whoever it is that you're busy learning a lesson in economics. Put it on speaker." Let's hear what poverty sounds like." Iphigenia slowly lifted her eyes from the ringing phone to Robert Sterling's arrogant face. A tiny, imperceptible shift happened in her posture. The deferential slouch of a waitress vanished. Her spine straightened, her shoulders squared, and the cold, brilliant mind of a Silicon Valley architect woke up from its 2-year hibernation. "Are you sure you want me to answer this, Mr. Sterling?" Iphigenia asked. Her voice was no longer soft. It was sharp, precise, and carried an authority that made Liam the manager take an involuntary step back. "I insist," Robert mocked, crossing his arms. Iphigenia reached down and picked up the phone. She didn't hold it to her ear. She pressed the heavy, tactile green button to accept the call, and then pressed the speaker button. Protocol Alpha engaged. Voice verification required. A synthesized, robotic voice announced from the phone's heavy-duty speaker. The executives exchanged confused glances. This didn't sound like a call from a frustrated landlord or a debt collector. It sounded like military hardware. Verification. "Bennett, 9 Echo Tango," Iphigenia said, clearly into the device. Her eyes locked dead onto Robert's face. A click echoed through the speaker, followed by the frantic, echoing sound of a large room full of people. "Iphigenia." "Good God, Iphigenia, is that you?" Harrison Abernathy's voice was strained, breathless, and tinged with panic. "I didn't think you'd actually pick up the offline device. We are in absolute crisis mode here." "I hear you, Harrison," Iphigenia replied calmly. "What's the situation?" "It's Sterling Capital," Harrison blurted out, his voice filling the private dining room. At the sound of his own company's name, Robert Sterling stiffened. The smug smile vanished from his lips instantly, replaced by a look of profound, paralyzed confusion. He looked at Greg, who looked equally terrified. "They've mobilized a hostile takeover," Harrison continued rapidly through the speaker. "Robert Sterling has managed to blindside the board. He's leveraged $2 billion in phantom capital to force a buyout of Nova Dynamics. He's freezing our assets as we speak. We have exactly 20 minutes to initiate the kill switch protocol, or he guts the company tomorrow morning. The board is split. We need the majority shareholder. We need you to vote, Iphigenia." Liam, the manager, was staring at Iphigenia with his mouth hanging open. He looked from her apron to the phone, trying to compute what was happening. Robert slowly placed both hands flat on the mahogany table. The blood drained from his face, leaving him looking sickly and grey. His mind, usually so sharp, was struggling to connect the dots. The waitress, the ancient phone, Nova Dynamics, majority shareholder. "Wait," Robert whispered, his voice hoarse. He pointed a trembling finger at Iphigenia. Who is on that phone?" Iphigenia didn't look away from him. She held the phone up closer to her mouth. "Harrison," Iphigenia said, her tone conversational, but laced with absolute steel. "Am I on speakerphone in the boardroom?" "Yes," Harrison replied. "The entire executive board is here, waiting for your instruction, Ms. Bennett." "Good," Iphigenia said, "because I happen to have a guest with me who might want to say hello. I'm currently standing in the Obsidian Room in Chicago, and I am looking directly into the eyes of Robert Sterling." A collective gasp echoed through the phone speaker from the distant boardroom. In the private dining room, the silence was deafening. The junior executives sat frozen like statues. Greg looked like he was about to be physically sick. Robert's mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish out of water. The arrogance that had radiated from him just minutes prior had evaporated into pure, unadulterated terror. "You!" Robert choked out, stumbling backward and knocking his heavy oak chair to the floor. "You're Iphigenia Bennett, the founder of Nova Dynamics? That's impossible! You vanished! You You're a waitress!" "I took a sabbatical, Robert," Iphigenia said, her voice dripping with the very same patronizing tone he had used on her earlier. "I found that serving water to over-leveraged, arrogant men was better for my mental health than dealing with them in a boardroom. It's a very peaceful life. Or it was, until you decided to disrupt it." Robert's hands flew to his pockets, patting himself down frantically until he retrieved his own sleek, state-of-the-art smartphone. He dialed a number with shaking fingers, pressing the phone to his ear. "Marcus, answer the damn phone," Robert yelled into his own device, completely losing his composure. "What is happening with the Nova deal? Who is the majority shareholder?" "Sir," a tiny, terrified voice leaked from Robert's earpiece. "We just got the intel. The silent owner. It's Iphigenia Bennett, the original architect. Sir, if she initiates the kill switch, our leverage vanishes. We're exposed. If this deal doesn't close tonight, Sterling Capital will be insolvent by Friday. The banks will call in our loans." Robert dropped his phone. It hit the floor, the modern glass screen cracking into a dozen jagged spiderwebs. He looked up at Iphigenia, the woman he had just humiliated, the woman he had used as a prop to inflate his own ego. She was holding the archaic, ugly rubber phone, the monument to failure, as he had called it, and resting her thumb gently over the pound key. "Ms. Bennett," Harrison's voice broke the silence through the speaker. "Do we have your authorization to activate the kill switch protocol? It will lock Sterling Capital out entirely and void the acquisition clauses." Iphigenia tilted her head, looking at Robert. "You know, Mr. Sterling, you were right about one thing," she said quietly. Robert fell to his knees, the bespoke Italian suit pooled awkwardly around him on the hardwood floor. He didn't care about his executives watching. He didn't care about the manager. He was watching his billion-dollar empire crumble in real time. "Iphigenia. Ms. Bennett. Please," he begged, his voice cracking. "Let's talk about this. I'll double the valuation. I'll give you a seat on my board. Don't do this." "You were right," Iphigenia continued, entirely ignoring his pleas. "It is about mindset. You see, I kept this old phone because it isn't connected to the internet. It can't be hacked. It can't be traced. It is perfectly adapted to do exactly one thing flawlessly: protect my life's work from predators like you." She looked down at him, her eyes cold and empty of sympathy. "Harrison," Iphigenia said into the device. "Yes, Ms. Bennett. Initiate the kill switch. Burn the Sterling deal to the ground. And Harrison, yes? Make sure the press knows exactly why Sterling Capital is filing for bankruptcy tomorrow." Iphigenia pressed the red button, cutting the connection. The harsh green light of the screen faded into blackness. She slipped the heavy, ugly phone back into her apron pocket, where it settled with a reassuring weight. She looked around the room, at the stunned executives, the hyperventilating manager, and the broken billionaire on his knees among the shattered glass of his own modern device. "Now," Iphigenia said smoothly, picking up her silver tray, "who ordered the caviar?" The silence in private room A was absolute, a heavy, a suffocating blanket that pressed against the eardrums of everyone present. The only sound was the ragged, uneven breathing of Robert Sterling, still kneeling amidst the wreckage of his shattered smartphone. The Macallan he had been swirling so arrogantly earlier had spilled across the mahogany table, dripping slowly onto the imported Persian rug with a rhythmic, mocking tap-tap-tap. Greg, the sycophantic vice president, was backed against the velvet wallpaper, his complexion the color of spoiled milk. The other junior executives had similarly transformed from hungry sharks into cornered prey. They were finance men. They understood the math of what had just happened. Without the Nova Dynamics acquisition to cover their heavily leveraged debt, Sterling Capital wasn't just losing a deal. They were facing institutional extinction. "Iphigenia," Liam, the floor manager, finally stammered. His voice was a pathetic squeak, completely stripped of its usual dictatorial bark. What have you done? He's a VIP. Iphigenia turned her gaze from the devastated billionaire on the floor to the trembling manager. Her expression remained chillingly composed. "He is a predator, Liam, and his line of credit is officially dead. I suggest you reconsider comping his meal." The shock that had paralyzed Robert suddenly shattered, replaced by a violent, unhinged surge of narcissistic rage. He couldn't process the humiliation. Men like Robert Sterling didn't lose to waitresses holding obsolete technology. They didn't lose in front of their subordinates. He scrambled to his feet, his bespoke suit jacket now wrinkled, his face flushed a dangerous, apoplectic purple. "You arrogant little—" Robert spat, taking a threatening step toward her. He pointed a shaking finger inches from her face. "You think you've won? You think a single phone call is going to stop me? I have armies of lawyers, Bennett. I have politicians on speed dial. I will tie Nova Dynamics up in so much litigation that your grandchildren will be paying the legal fees. I will bleed you dry." He whirled around to face Liam, spittle flying from his lips. "Fire her! Fire this insubordinate wretch right now. I want her escorted out of this building by security. I want her blacklisted from every restaurant, every hotel, every hospitality group in the state of Illinois. Do you hear me?" Liam, desperate to salvage his career and his restaurant's reputation, nodded frantically. He practically lunged toward Iphigenia. "You're done, Iphigenia! Take off the apron, leave the tray. You are terminated effective immediately. Get out before I call the police for corporate espionage." Iphigenia didn't flinch. She didn't drop the silver tray holding the rejected glass of water. Instead, she let out a short, quiet sigh, the kind a weary teacher might give to a particularly slow student. "Liam," Iphigenia said softly, her voice carrying a terrifying authority that stopped the manager dead in his tracks. "Before you call the police, or security, or anyone else, I highly recommend you check your email. Specifically, the secure memo sent out at 4 p.m. today by the board of Axiom Hospitality." Liam froze, his eyes darting back and forth. Axiom Hospitality was the massive, faceless conglomerate that owned the Obsidian Room, along with 24 other Michelin-starred properties across the globe. What are you talking about?" "Just check it," Iphigenia insisted gently. With trembling hands, Liam pulled his phone from his breast pocket. He opened his corporate inbox, his eyes scanning the most recent, high-priority message. As he read, his mouth fell open. He read it again, and then a third time. He looked up at Iphigenia, a profound, soul-crushing terror dawning in his eyes. "You," Liam whispered, the phone slipping from his grasp and clattering onto a silver service cart. "The silent partner buyout. The restructuring—" "Yes," Iphigenia confirmed, adjusting the cuffs of her waitress uniform. "When I stepped away from the tech world 2 years ago, I needed to park a portion of my liquid assets somewhere stable. Real estate and high-end hospitality seemed safe. I bought a 51% controlling stake in Axiom Hospitality through a blind trust. I am the majority owner of this restaurant. Liam?" Greg let out a strangled gasp, sliding down the velvet wall to sit on the floor. Robert stared at her, the veins in his neck bulging. "You're lying," he hissed, though the panic in his eyes betrayed him. "You're a waitress. You serve water." "I serve water because it keeps me grounded," Iphigenia replied, her tone turning ice cold. "It reminds me of what real work looks like. It reminds me of the people your firm guts and discards every single day. I own the ground you are standing on, Robert. I own the chair you were sitting in. And as of 3 minutes ago, I own your future." She turned back to Liam, who was now hyperventilating. "Liam, you are not fired, but you are going to undergo intensive retraining on how to treat your staff. As for Mr. Sterling and his associates," Iphigenia looked at the men in the room, "you are trespassing. Your presence is disrupting my dining room. Leave immediately, or I will have my security physically throw you into the alley." Robert opened his mouth to scream another threat, but nothing came out. The sheer, overwhelming reality of his absolute defeat had finally crushed the air from his lungs. He was looking at a ghost who had orchestrated his demise while pouring his sparkling water. Without a word, Robert Sterling turned and stumbled blindly toward the heavy oak door. He didn't look back at his executives. He didn't look back at the spilled Macallan. He burst through the doors and fled down the service corridor, leaving his empire in ruins behind him. The night air in Chicago was biting, carrying the sharp chill of a looming storm. Robert Sterling barely felt it as he practically fell into the back seat of his waiting armored Maybach. "The office, Bradley! Drive! Now!" Robert screamed at his driver, slamming his fists against the leather partition. As the luxury vehicle tore through the downtown streets, running 2 red lights in the process, Robert grabbed the backup tablet stored in the armrest. His hands shook so violently he could barely enter his passcode. When the screen finally unlocked, the dashboard of his life's work greeted him. It was a bloodbath. The kill switch Iphigenia Bennett had initiated wasn't just a defensive maneuver. It was a digital bear trap. By formally logging the hostile takeover attempt and simultaneously deploying a hard, cryptographic rejection from the majority shareholder, the Nova Dynamics legal team had triggered a poison pill clause. The automated systems at Wall Street were already reacting. The phantom capital Robert had leveraged, money he didn't actually have, borrowed against the projected post-acquisition value of Nova Dynamics, was evaporating. Margin calls were triggering like dominoes. Bing! An email notification popped up on the tablet. It was from Arthur Pendleton, the notoriously ruthless chairman of the investment bank that held Sterling Capital's primary debt. Subject: immediate recall. Robert, we've seen the filings. The Nova deal is dead. You lied about the shareholder status. Your credit lines are frozen effective midnight. We are calling in the loans. God help you. Robert threw the tablet against the reinforced glass window. It shattered, raining shards of glass onto the floorboards. "No, no, no, no," he chanted, gripping his silver hair and pulling violently. Meanwhile, miles away, the atmosphere was vastly different. Iphigenia Bennett walked out of the service entrance of the Obsidian Room. She had left her black apron neatly folded on Liam's desk. The night air felt clean, washing away the smell of expensive cologne and fear that had permeated Private Room A. A sleek, unmarked black town car sat idling by the curb. As Iphigenia approached, the rear door swung open. Sitting inside was Harrison Abernathy. He was a man in his late 60s, wearing a perfectly tailored tweed suit, his face lined with years of corporate warfare, but his eyes were bright and alive. Iphigenia slid into the leather seat and closed the door. "Good evening, Harrison." "Miss Bennett," Harrison breathed, a massive smile breaking across his weathered face. "I haven't heard your voice in 24 months. I thought I was going to have a heart attack when you actually answered the offline device." "I told you I'd only use it for emergencies," Iphigenia said, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "I'd say Robert Sterling, trying to steal my life's work, qualifies." "Steal it, gut it, and sell our encryption patents to overseas data brokers," Harrison corrected grimly, pulling a thick leather binder from his briefcase. He had half the board cornered. He blackmailed our CFO, threatened to expose some ugly personal debts. Sterling plays dirty. But he never anticipated that the legendary architect of Nova Dynamics was pouring water at his favorite restaurant. "Pride makes men blind, Harrison," Iphigenia said, looking out the tinted window as the city lights blurred past. He looked right at my offline comms device, a piece of hardware worth more than his car, and saw only poverty because it didn't look like a shiny new toy. It was the perfect camouflage. Harrison chuckled, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. Speaking of that hardware, the kill switch execution was flawless. Because your authorization came from a closed-loop, unhackable offline system, Sterling's cyber team couldn't intercept or delay the rejection filing. It hit the SEC servers instantly. "What's his current status?" Iphigenia asked, her tone shifting to strict business. The waitress was gone. The CEO had returned. Harrison opened the binder, tapping a beautifully manicured finger against a printed spreadsheet. "He is bleeding out. Fast. His firm operates on a predatory model. Buy, gut, flip. But to do that, he requires massive amounts of short-term, high-interest debt. When the Nova deal fell through publicly, his lenders panicked. As of 10 minutes ago, Arthur Pendleton froze his credit lines." "Pendleton," Iphigenia mused. "He's a shark. If he smells blood in the water, he'll tear Sterling apart before dawn." "Exactly," Harrison nodded. "But here is the twist, Iphigenia. Sterling isn't going down without a fight. We intercepted a flurry of dark web traffic emanating from his corporate headquarters. He's hired a mercenary cyber squad. He's trying a brute force attack on Nova Dynamics mainframes right now. He thinks if he can steal the encryption source code before the bank seize his assets tomorrow, he can sell it on the black market and flee the country with the capital." Iphigenia actually laughed, a sharp, bright sound that filled the dark cabin of the town car. "Let him try," she said, leaning back into the luxurious leather. "Did he forget who he's dealing with? I built that encryption. It's not sitting on a cloud server waiting to be breached. The core architecture is completely decentralized, utilizing the same offline, closed-loop protocols as my old phone. He's trying to hack a fortress that isn't even plugged into the internet." "It's a suicide mission," Harrison agreed, closing the binder. "But it shows his desperation. He is a cornered animal." Iphigenia's expression hardened, the amusement fading. "Good. Because stopping him from taking Nova Dynamics isn't enough, Harrison." Harrison raised an eyebrow. "Oh?" "No," Iphigenia said, turning to look her lawyer dead in the eye. "Sterling Capital has destroyed dozens of brilliant startups. They've laid off thousands of good, hard-working people just to inflate their quarterly margins. We aren't just defending ourselves tonight. We are going on the offensive." Iphigenia reached into her pocket and pulled out the heavy, rubber-encased brick phone. She placed it on the armrest between them. "Sterling thinks he's fighting a corporate battle." "He's not," Iphigenia said softly, the glow of the street lamps catching the cold determination in her eyes. "Call the board back into session, Harrison. I want to leverage our cash reserves. While Robert Sterling is distracted trying to hack an unhackable system, I want Nova Dynamics to execute a hostile takeover of Sterling Capital. We are going to buy his ruined firm for pennies on the dollar by morning." Harrison stared at her, utterly speechless, before a slow, fierce grin spread across his face. "Welcome back, Miss Bennett." The penthouse office of Sterling Capital was a monument to glass, steel, and ruthless ambition. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Chicago skyline, a glittering grid of lights that Robert Sterling had always viewed as his personal chessboard. Tonight, however, The city looked cold and indifferent to his collapse. It was 2:14 a.m. The air in the office was thick with the smell of stale coffee and raw panic. "Talk to me, David," Robert bellowed, throwing a heavy crystal paperweight across the room. It shattered against a marble pillar, raining fragments onto the plush carpet. "You told me you had the best cyber mercenaries in the hemisphere. Why aren't we inside Nova Dynamics' mainframe yet?" David, Sterling Capital's chief technology officer, wiped a sheen of terrified sweat from his forehead. He was huddled over a bank of 4 glowing monitors, his fingers flying across the keyboards. "Sir, you don't understand the architecture we are dealing with here. It's completely decentralized. There is no cloud to hack. The core proprietary data, the encryption patents, are locked behind a physical air-gap protocol. It's like trying to rob a bank vault by yelling at the building from across the street." "Find a back door!" Robert screamed, grabbing the back of David's ergonomic chair and shaking it violently. "If we don't have that source code to offer as collateral by 6 a.m., Pendleton is going to liquidate everything. My houses, my cars, the company, everything is leveraged. Hack them." "There is no back door, Mr. Sterling," David whispered, his hands finally dropping from the keyboard in defeat. "Whoever built this system, they didn't just build a wall, they built a black hole. Any brute force data we send in just gets swallowed and encrypted against us. The architect is a ghost." "She's not a ghost," Robert roared, his voice cracking hysterically. "She's a waitress. I watched her pour my water." While Robert was losing his grip on reality in his glass tower, a very different kind of meeting was taking place in a dimly lit, wood-paneled study at the edge of Lake Michigan. Iphigenia Bennett sat behind a massive oak desk, a cup of chamomile tea resting beside her ancient, rubber-encased offline phone. Harrison Abernathy sat opposite her, a secure laptop open, displaying real-time financial data. On the screen was a video call with Arthur Pendleton, the ruthless chairman of the investment bank holding Robert Sterling's toxic debt. Pendleton was a man who looked exactly like his reputation: sharp, calculating, and utterly devoid of sentiment. Even at 2:30 a.m., he was wearing a crisp suit and tie. "Ms. Bennett," Pendleton's gravelly voice came through the laptop speakers. "I must admit, when Harrison woke me up to tell me the silent founder of Nova Dynamics wanted to buy Sterling Capital's debt portfolio, I thought it was a desperate joke. You just blocked his takeover. Why on earth do you want to buy his rotting carcass?" "Because, Mr. Pendleton, I don't just want to stop Robert Sterling. I want to make an example of him," Iphigenia said smoothly. She leaned forward, resting her hands on the desk. "Sterling Capital owes your bank roughly $1.4 billion, backed by phantom assets that just vanished when my kill switch went live. By tomorrow morning, when the SEC opens, that debt will be classified as toxic. You will have to write it off, and your shareholders will demand your resignation for letting him over-leverage to begin with." Pendleton's eyes narrowed on the screen. He knew she was right. "Get to the point. I am offering to buy the entirety of Sterling Capital's debt portfolio right now, before the sun comes up," Iphigenia stated, her voice devoid of any hesitation. "I will pay you 20 cents on the dollar in liquid cash, $280 million, wired instantly from my blind trust at Axiom Hospitality. You clear the toxic asset from your books before the bell rings, you save your job, and I become Robert Sterling's sole creditor." Silence hung heavily in the study. Harrison held his breath. It was an astonishingly aggressive move, the kind of financial throat-cutting that Silicon Valley legends were made of. Pendleton stroked his chin. 20 cents is an insult, Ms. Bennett. I want 40. 15, Iphigenia countered instantly, her gaze piercing through the webcam. Every minute you hesitate, The news of his failed takeover leaks further into the Asian markets. The asset is depreciating as we speak. 15 cents, Arthur. Say yes, and I'll initiate the wire transfer right now. Pendleton stared at the young woman on his screen. He saw no bluff, no fear, only the cold, calculated execution of a master strategist. He sighed, a sound of reluctant respect. Send the wire, Ms. Bennett. The debt is yours. Iphigenia nodded. She didn't touch the laptop. Instead, she picked up the battered, heavy offline phone from the desk. She keyed in a 12-digit alphanumeric code on the physical keypad, completely bypassing the internet, routing directly to the heavily fortified servers of the Swiss bank holding her Axiom trust. Beep, boop, beep. A small green confirmation text scrolled across the scratched monochrome screen. Funds cleared. Transfer complete. The money is in your account, Arthur, Iphigenia said. Send Harrison the digital deeds to Sterling Capital's assets. The video call ended. Harrison closed the laptop, letting out a long, shaky breath. He looked at Iphigenia, awe radiating from his eyes. You just bought a billionaire for pocket change, using a phone that looks like it belongs in a museum. Iphigenia stood up, smoothing the front of her dark slacks. The waitress uniform was gone forever. She reached for a tailored, charcoal-grey blazer draped over the back of her chair. Harrison, Iphigenia said, slipping her arms into the jacket. Call my driver. It's time to go into the office. The first faint ribbons of dawn stretching across the Chicago skyline were the color of bruised iron. Inside the penthouse office of Sterling Capital, the atmosphere was suffocatingly heavy, smelling of stale espresso, cold sweat, and the sharp, coppery tang of pure panic. Robert Sterling, a man who had spent the last 3 decades cultivating an aura of absolute invincibility, looked like a survivor of a shipwreck. His bespoke charcoal suit jacket lay crumpled on the floor near a shattered crystal decanter. His silk tie was pulled loose, hanging around his neck like a noose. For the past 3 hours, he had paced the length of his imported Persian rug, his custom leather shoes wearing a metaphorical trench into the floorboards. He had tried calling everyone. He called his crisis management team at Blackwood Consulting. It went straight to voicemail. He tried his personal wealth manager at Morgan Stanley. The line rang out. He even tried calling William Bradley, his notoriously cutthroat defense attorney, but William's secretary tersely informed him that the firm was re-evaluating their conflict of interest parameters regarding Sterling Capital. In the span of a single night, the billionaire had been excommunicated from the religion of wealth. The moment Arthur Pendleton froze his credit lines, the invisible shield that protected Robert from the consequences of his own predatory behavior had evaporated. He was alone. His CTO had abandoned him. His sycophantic junior executives had fled into the night, desperate to distance themselves from the impending SEC investigations. The massive glass-walled office, once a symbol of his dominion over the city, now felt like a very expensive mausoleum. Ding. The soft melodic chime of the private executive elevator sliced through the dead silence of the penthouse. Robert froze. His bloodshot eyes darted toward the frosted glass doors. A spark of desperate hope ignited in his chest. Pendleton, he thought frantically. Pendleton came in person to negotiate. He wants higher interest. I can give him higher interest. I can leverage the Cayman accounts. He frantically tried to smooth his ruined hair and tuck in his wrinkled dress shirt. He stood behind his massive, monolithic desk, carved from a single slab of reclaimed mahogany, gripping the edges to hide the violent tremor in his hands. He took a deep breath, trying to summon the ghost of the arrogant venture capitalist who had mocked a waitress just 12 hours prior. The heavy glass doors slid open with a soft, hydraulic hiss. It wasn't Arthur Pendleton. Iphigenia Bennet stepped out of the elevator. The transformation was so absolute, so jarringly severe, that for a fraction of a second, Robert's exhausted brain refused to recognize her. The black, stained apron and the subservient slouch were entirely gone. Her dark hair was styled in a sleek, sharp cut. She wore a perfectly tailored midnight blue executive suit that draped flawlessly over her shoulders, radiating a quiet, terrifying authority. Flanking her were two towering, broad-shouldered men dressed in tactical black suits, the earpieces coiled behind their necks, betraying them as high-tier private security contractors. "Bennet!" Robert choked out, his voice a ragged whisper. He blinked hard, thinking it was a stress-induced hallucination. How the hell did you get up here? The executive lift is biometric." "I own the building's management company, Robert," Iphigenia said smoothly. Her voice didn't echo in the large room. It cut through the air with surgical precision. "As of 4 a.m., my security firm relieved your lobby staff. You've been locked in this penthouse for 2 hours and you didn't even know it." Robert felt the last vestiges of his manufactured courage drain through the soles of his shoes. He slammed a trembling hand onto the intercom button on his desk console. "Security! I need security on the penthouse level immediately. There are trespassers." "Stop embarrassing yourself," Iphigenia interrupted softly. She walked slowly toward his desk. The rhythmic, deliberate click of her heels against the hardwood floor sounded like the ticking of a doomsday clock. She didn't stop until she was standing directly across from him. The physical distance between them was mere inches, but the power dynamic had inverted so violently it left Robert reeling. "You can't be here," Robert hissed, gripping the mahogany desk until his knuckles turned white. "You think you've won because you triggered a poison pill? You think stopping one acquisition ruins me? I have offshore reserves. I have assets in holding companies you can't even pronounce. I will drag Nova Dynamics through appellate courts until you are begging to settle." Iphigenia didn't flinch. She simply reached into the inner breast pocket of her blazer and extracted a thick, leather-bound portfolio. She dropped it onto the center of his pristine leather blotter. It landed with a heavy, final thud that seemed to shake the room. The embossed logo of Pendleton's investment bank gleamed in gold foil on the cover. Below it, a bright red stamp read, "Immediate transfer of debt portfolio. Executed." "I didn't come here to discuss Nova Dynamics, Robert," Iphigenia said, her eyes locking onto his with the cold, unblinking focus of an apex predator. "I came here to discuss your debt. Specifically, the $1.4 billion you owed to Arthur Pendleton as of midnight last night." Robert stared at the folder. He felt his throat close up. "What did you do?" he whispered, the hostility draining from his voice, replaced entirely by dread. "I bought it," Iphigenia stated, her tone conversational but utterly devoid of empathy. "While you were in this room, screaming at your CTO to hack an unhackable offline network, I wired $280 million in liquid cash to Pendleton's bank. I bought your toxic debt at 20 cents on the dollar." "No," Robert breathed, stumbling backward a half step. "No, Pendleton wouldn't sell. He wouldn't—" "He did," Iphigenia corrected him. "Because I offered him a way to save his career before the markets opened and your insolvency became public record. Which means, Mr. Sterling, as of roughly 2 hours ago, I am your sole secured creditor." She reached out and flipped the leather cover open. The first page was a master sheet of asset liquidations. "You leveraged everything to try and steal my company," Iphigenia continued, tapping a perfectly manicured finger against the printed lines of text. "You put up your corporate fleet as collateral. You put up your Hamptons estate. You put up the operational capital of this very firm. Because you are in immediate default, the terms of those loans grant the creditor full right of seizure. Robert's legs finally gave out. He collapsed heavily into his ergonomic mesh chair, his mouth opening and closing silently. The arrogance that had defined his entire existence had been vaporized. Iphigenia. Miss Bennet, Robert stammered, his eyes watering with a profound, soul-crushing humiliation. The bargaining phase of his grief had arrived. Listen to me. We are both business people. We are both visionaries. You made a brilliant move, masterful, but destroying me doesn't maximize your return on investment. He leaned forward, his hands clasped together in a desperate, pathetic gesture of prayer. I know how to run this firm, Robert pleaded, his voice cracking. I know where the hidden capital is. Let's make a deal, a partnership. Keep me on as CEO. I'll give you 70% of the voting shares. Hell, I'll give you 80. We can rebuild the portfolio together. You have the capital. I have the connections. We can rule this city. Iphigenia looked at him, and for the first time that night, a genuine expression crossed her face. It was a look of profound, unadulterated disgust. You still don't get it, do you? She said quietly. You look at this paperwork, and you see a transaction. You see a negotiation. She leaned over the desk, invading his space, forcing him to shrink back into his chair. This isn't a negotiation, Robert. This is an extermination, Iphigenia hissed, her voice dropping an octave. You have spent decades destroying brilliant innovators. You gutted companies built with blood, sweat, and genuine passion, just so you could strip them for parts and inflate your ego. You looked at me yesterday, a woman carrying a tray, and you saw nothing but a prop for your own amusement. You looked at my offline communication device and called it a monument to failure. You equated human worth with a shiny piece of glass. Iphigenia straightened up, buttoning her blazer with a sharp, decisive movement. I don't want a partnership. I don't want your connections. And I certainly don't want your money, Iphigenia declared, her voice ringing out in the quiet office. I bought your debt to erase you from the board. By 9 a.m., KPMG auditors will be here to freeze your accounts. By noon, your corporate jet will be sold to a charter company. And by the end of the week, the name Sterling Capital will be nothing more than a cautionary tale taught in business schools about the fatal cost of arrogance. Robert stared at her. He was crying now, silent, hot tears of absolute defeat tracking down his flushed cheeks. There was no anger left in him. The mathematical reality of his ruin was an unbreakable cage. You have exactly 5 minutes, Iphigenia said, checking the slim platinum watch on her wrist. Pack 1 box of personal items, photos, a coat, nothing with proprietary data. If you are not in the lobby by 6:15 a.m., my security team will physically drag you out to the sidewalk. She turned her back on him and walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, completely dismissing him from her reality. Behind her, she heard the pathetic, shuffling sounds of a broken man. She heard the rustle of a cardboard box being pulled from a closet. She heard the clinking of picture frames and the soft, ragged sobs of a billionaire realizing he was now entirely worthless. Robert Sterling didn't say another word. The heavy glass doors slid open and then closed with a final, sealing click. The elevator chimed, and he was gone. Iphigenia stood alone in the penthouse. The morning sun had finally crested the horizon, bathing the city of Chicago in a brilliant, blinding gold. The storm had passed. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the thick, heavy, rubber-encased offline phone. It was ugly, scratched, and entirely obsolete to the modern eye. She smiled, placing the heavy brick gently onto the center of Robert Sterling's empty mahogany desk. It was the most valuable thing in the room. True power rarely announces itself. It does not need bespoke Italian suits, corner offices, or the sycophantic laughter of yes-men to validate its existence. Robert Sterling's downfall was not merely a financial miscalculation, it was a fatal failure of perception. Intoxicated by his own arrogance, he mistook humility for weakness and an archaic tool for obsolescence. He failed to realize that the most dangerous opponent is never the one shouting at the head of the table, but the quiet observer pouring the water. Iphigenia Bennet proved that true brilliance doesn't require modern flash or a billionaire's posturing. It requires patience, an unbreakable foundation, and the precise, ruthless timing to strike when the enemy is blinded by their own ego. The waitress with the ancient phone walked away with an empire, leaving a broken billionaire with nothing but a cardboard box and a profound lesson in respect.